Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. As you can see, I'm on the road today. It's Sunday, the first day after the federal election, and it looks as if we've got a change in government, and only time will tell whether or not that is a good change or a bad change. I'm a little bit concerned given that we have an untested party, a party that hasn't been in government for over 10 years, taking the reins, and they may not be a majority government but have to work vigorously and closely with a crossbench of up to maybe 12 representatives, which will make things tricky, to say the least. Anyway, I thought I'd get up this morning. I got up pretty early, disappointed last night with the result, because I did feel that the coalition led by Scott Morrison were doing a great job, but it just goes to show how much of a thankless task politics is, where you can deliver outstanding economic outcomes in terms of economic growth, which leads all of the leading economies throughout the world a record low unemployment rate of 3.9%. And we're heading into some challenging times. We've got the war in Ukraine, we've got the posturing of China, we've got stagflation and inflation impacting financial markets, we've got rising interest rates, we've got a huge amount of debt, and uncertain times financially on a global perspective. And we're at a time where we really need to have an experienced captain at the helm with a time and tested team delivering at the operational level. Sad to hear that Josh Frydenberg has lost his seat. So a talented, a wonderful treasurer who orchestrated JobKeeper, JobSaver, and saved people's jobs and saved people's livelihoods at a time where things were really, really bad. Not only were they bad here in Australia, but they were bad all over the world, and we've come through relatively unscathed, with the share market rocketing back, having a bit of a correction at the moment. But still, it looks like things are looking good. Property market is strong, and we're just hoping, have our fingers crossed, that the new boys and girls in town don't get carried away with their left-leaning policies and throw out the baby with the bathwater. Anyway, I hope to take you on a journey today. I'm heading down to Hyams Beach, a place that I haven't been to for well over 45 years, down at Jervis Bay. I used to go down there all the time with my Auntie Frida, my Uncle George, my cousin Anna, and on occasion my Auntie Anna would join us as well. We'd go down there and stay there 4 or 5 weeks every year down at St George's Basin. We'd fish, we'd swim, we'd go horse riding, we'd play cards, we'd listen to music, and basically had the time of our lives back in the days when my long-suffering parents would be working 7 days a week, trying to build a future for themselves, for me, and a legacy for their grandchildren, which I'm pleased to say is intact and has made or is making a positive difference in my life and my children's life, and hopefully my grandchildren's life as well. So today, stick with me. We're going on a journey, an adventure, and for those who are bedbound, for those who are homebound, for those who don't get out and about, you're welcome to be my partner for the day, to join me vicariously, remotely, using this wonderful technology, where we can share, we can highlight and showcase the beauty of this country that we live in, the greenery, the mist, the clouds, and I can overlay it with a lesson, a moment of learning where we can have an empowering message that we can share and hopefully learn something from. So today I'm going to go through a book summary entitled The Black Swan by an author known as Nassim Taleb. It was written a number of really interesting books, pretty cool sort of books, the sort of books that the upwardly mobile young executives tend to read and often quote. It's pretty edgy in terms of what he talks about, but it's the sort of thing that can be used in various contexts. It can be used in a business context, in a personal context, in a relationship or a relational context, because it allows us to look at ourselves more objectively and identify and understand that we are all work in progress. You know, we have our warts and we're not as good, not as clever, not as capable as what we often think. So this book basically shines a light on our areas of improvement, of things that we need to be aware of to make us cognizant and allow us to be objective in our viewpoints, and to know that the stuff that we do know, the stuff that we don't know, and the stuff that we don't even know that we don't know, that will eventually evolve and raise itself at the right moment in our life, and it will come in the form of an experience that we get to enjoy, or an experience that other people get to teach us through their example or through their warning, because each and every person is an example or a warning to others. We are an example of what to do in some cases, and what works for us, and something that may work for them. But we also pose a great opportunity for other people to learn by seeing us as a warning. You know, risks that we have taken, or things that we have done that have not worked out, or things that have led to pain, suffering for ourselves or for others. But along the way, each and every person is a lesson in themselves and for others. And we were born, we were created. We came into the world as unique, different people, and we were different from each other, but most importantly, we were made different for each other. So we're different from each other, and that difference is for each other. Because what we can do is we can springboard, we can compare and contrast. We can use the similarities, we can use the differences to use to compare and baseline and benchmark who we are, what our identity is, and compare it to what is possible or what may be possible in the future. So this book talks about the black swan, and it illustrates the severe limitations of our thinking and fragility of our knowledge. And once again, the objective of this book is to enable us to be more humble, less entitled, less opinionated in terms of what we think, how we think, and to know that there are gaps and there are biases and there are fallacies that we have been sucked into that we may not be aware of, but we may become aware of with time or upon reflection after reading and being subjected to this way of thinking that this author will present to us. So the author goes on to say something which may be profound to many people. I find it always very interesting and profound. And he says that we are often influenced, we are often heavily influenced by biases and irrationalities. A lot of the fears that we harbour, a lot of the problems that we face are based on things which are not real, are based on irrational fears that we have self-generated through our own incorrect thinking, or things that we have inherited from others around us, from our parents, from our friends, from the media, from our siblings, our uncles, our aunts, our grandparents, our school teachers, you name it. You never know where these things are inherited from and the impression they make upon us, and the level of impression that they make, which may or may not be relevant or proportional to the actual event that we have experienced. So we have these biases, these irrational fears, shadows that we shy away from, that once tested, once we rationally think about them, or once we have somebody help us, coach us through them, we realize that at the end of the day, we are prisoners of our own making, and we each hold the keys to freedom. All we need to do is to take the key of rationality and to unlock those chains that have us enslaved to the fears which are irrational and not real at all. So the author just takes us through a small subset of what these fears may be, or what these biases may be. And he talks about a thing called a narrative fallacy. He talks about a thing called a lucid fallacy. And he talks about things such as confirmation biases. But what he says is that we all are infected by these things. They all impact us in ways that we didn't even know that were possible. And the more educated one is, the more one thinks themselves as being a critical thinker, the more one thinks that they are smarter than everybody else is probably a sign that these people are the ones who are at most trouble and the ones who are probably reflecting this incorrect and damaging bias and issues that change or impact the way they see the world, because these biases, these frameworks, the way we frame things, the way we see things, our worldview can be correct or it can be incorrect, or it can be both correct and incorrect and used out of context and create perceptions and perspectives which are going to lead us to the wrong decisions and wrong choices. So what is a black swan? Why did the author name his book The Black Swan? So the author says that before the discovery of Australia, the old world was convinced that all swans were white and white only. So their slither of reality, their view of the truth, was that a swan can only be white. So life was easy. When you talked about a swan, or when you thought about a swan, when you imagined a swan, in your mind's eye, you would see a white swan. So when I told you I saw a swan, you assumed and you knew that I was talking about a white swan. But it was only when the first Australians came to Australia that they saw for the first time a thing called a black swan, which redefined, which changed the whole concept, the whole perspective of what a swan is. Because now a swan could be a white swan, because we've got white swans in Australia as well, or it could be a black swan. So all of a sudden, when somebody who was returning from Australia talked about swans, you didn't know if he was talking about a white swan or a black swan, and you had to then ask a clarifying question to better understand what we were talking about. So what happens in our lives is that we don't quite realize it, because we're all swimming in water, just like a goldfish swims in water, and you don't realize that you're swimming in water, that there is water around you, and you kind of take it for granted. And similarly, people are swimming in the currents, in the waves of biases and fallacies and irregular and incorrect thinking. But they don't see it, they don't understand it, because that's the way they've been brought up. That's the meaning that they've applied to the things that they know. That's the education that they've inherited from others around them. So they don't know the errors in their way, and they use those slithers of reality, because we all experience, we all accumulate slithers of reality throughout our lives, because each of us have a unique and a different life. I had a different childhood. I've had a different past. I've been to a different school. I married a different person. I've travelled to different places. And all of those experiences that I've had in my past have enabled me to see slithers of reality. Small slithers of reality which will shape, colour, shade and define my view of the world, my framework, my encyclopedia, my baseline, my benchmark, the things that I can compare and contrast to. And sometimes these slithers of information play a big part in how a person sees the world. For example, if somebody was assaulted as a young child, or I forget what the word is, but anyway, if somebody was mistreated as a child during those very those years that make the most impact on their lives, then it may have a bigger impact and a bigger influence of how they measure things and how they see things. So what we're saying is that we've all had a different past, which will influence our worldview and how we treat things and how we weigh things and how we work things out. We're all going to have a different present. I am here, right here and now. You are somewhere else, seeing something else, doing something else. You may be in a different time and space. You may be seeing this video in a decade's time or 100 years' time and be amazed that there are actually cars driving around with people driving them, and us using fossil fuels and fuels to use it as power. Who knows where you're going to be, but one thing for sure and for certain, I am here, you are there, and we are experiencing different, completely different slithers of information and slithers of reality, and we are going to experience a different future. There's no doubt about that. Nobody's going to have the same past, present or future. We're different. But what we try and do is we try and identify commonalities, areas where we've got common reality, things where we can compare and contrast our experiences and basically experience and see and agree at least that we've seen and know the same thing. So our observations, our slithers of reality are limiting in many ways, and it's up to us to understand that those slithers are limiting so that we can learn from other people's experiences, so we don't have to go through the pain and suffering that people go through, not knowing the first, second and third level consequences that may arise from the actions that they take, for choices that they make either consciously or subconsciously. Because everything we do, everything that other people do, has a direct and an indirect impact on us in a positive and possibly a negative way. So we need to be aware that we're swimming in this environment. This environment envelops us and surrounds us, and for many people, they don't see the impact that all of these biases have on them, such as the narrative fallacy. Because what happens is sometimes we create narratives, stories, or other people create stories for us. We've seen it over this election campaign, how each of the parties have created narratives. The media has created a narrative, and before you know it, you're caught up in a narrative, even though it may be incorrect or something that you don't agree or understand. But as we're saying, you follow a narrative, and once you get caught up in the current of a particular narrative, then you can't think clearly. You just follow the group think or follow what other people are telling you, and you're not able to look at it objectively and be able to decipher reality from fallacy. The other thing that the author talks about here is the lucid fallacy, where we all seem to think that the experiences that we've had, the things that we think, and the way we behave and the decisions we make are the right ones. Nobody makes a decision knowing that the decision they're making is wrong. We will all justify what we're doing and why we're doing it, because that's how we're wired, that's how we think, that's how we've been brought up, which leads us to the confirmation biases that surround us. Because what happens is that because humans are teleological in nature, and we have a thing in our brain called the reticular activating system, which is a filter and allows us to focus on certain things. What happens is that once we make our decision, or once we make a choice, or once we form a thought, then the lenses that we see the world through are going to be a reflection, or going to be a byproduct of how we see the world and what we actually do in this confirmation bias. Is that we try and confirm what we think is right, what we think is true. We try and confirm our experiences and rationalize to ourselves that what we've done is correct, and evidence will pop up all the time. But once you've got a certain way of thinking, and your reticular activating system is loaded up with a certain filter, then all you're going to be seeing is evidence which proves you're right. You're not going to be looking for evidence that proves you're wrong, and hence why people have such strong views on such topics is because the confirmation biases are keeping them in their frame of thought. And the more educated you are, the more confirmation biases impact your life, the more groupthink keeps you on a particular intellectual orbit that you can't break free of, and hence why you can have very, very smart people, very well educated people saying stupid things and being caught up with conspiracy theories and suggesting that there is no such thing as a soul. All of these things impact people, and the more educated you become, the more fixed you become in your thinking, because what you're doing is you're filing away, and you're honing your thinking that you're thinking correctly, and what you're seeing and what you're observing and what you're storing in your evidence base is correct, but you may be being manipulated by the games that other people play. And it's easy to trick, it's easy to con a smart person, because all you need to do is to set the trap, set the environment, do the pre-work, and they'll rationally fall into the trap, thinking that they're still the smartest person in the room. So what we're getting to here is that our experiences are not necessarily our reality. They're a slither of reality. They could be the right perspective, or they could be the wrong perspective. It all depends. If we both go to a party and we take a video camera, and you've got a video camera and I've got a video camera, and you're at one end of the room and I'm at another end of the room, depending on where you're pointing your camera, depending on what you're focusing on, will be your reality. And the same case with me. Whatever I focus on will be my reality from that night. So I could be out the back where two people are making out, and I see that, and that's my reality. Or you could be inside and see two people fighting, and that's your reality of the night. And when we compare and contrast our stories, you'll say that it was a terrible party, people bloody fighting, and I'll say, well, look, it wasn't a terrible party. There were people making love. So just goes to show that what you focus on becomes your reality. So we need to understand that we also are surrounded by things called scotomas, or blind spots. And even, as we said, very, very educated people can have blind spots and not see the obvious. They can't see the thing that a child can see or a simple person can see, because their reticular activating system has been loaded up with particular views that all they're looking for is what they've programmed into their reticular activating system, and anything which doesn't match or align to those values is eliminated. And the body can actually shut things out. Just like the body can shut things out, it can also fill in the gaps so that you actually get to see things which are not really there, but you go 1 + 1 is 2, or 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 is 3, and you just basically, as I said before, are manipulated consciously and subconsciously into thinking a certain way and seeing certain things. So we need to be aware of this, but a lot of people aren't aware of this. It's only when you do certain exercises in a group environment where you are embarrassed into not seeing something that everybody else sees, or seeing something after the effect where you've said, look, it's not there, I've read it 5 times, and this piece of writing does not include what you're telling me it includes. So it just helps us understand a little bit better our weaknesses and makes it obvious to us, so that we know that if we're making these mistakes, then other people who are listening to us could be making similar mistakes. So if we're both making mistakes, then just like a coin, there's a heads, there's a tails, and the truth may be in between. It may be the rim around the coin. What I'm seeing, what somebody else is seeing, could be completely different, but it may not even be the reality. The reality could be something else. So we could both be wrong. So there's a story here about a famous Italian, and it's called Umberto's Library. There was this very, very wealthy man in Roman times. His name was Mr. Efo, and became very, very wealthy. And one of his legacies to the world was that he created a massive library in his house, a massive library where he accumulated lots and lots of books, and guests would come to his house and admire his library and tell him how wonderful his library is and how lucky he is to have such a big library. And his response to them was that this library that I have is not for me to read, is not for me to study, but it is a reminder to let me know, to remind me how ignorant I am, because there is so much information, there is so much wisdom in the world that no one person could ever hope to capture it all, to absorb it all, and to leverage it. So it doesn't matter how smart you think you are, doesn't matter how much of an avid reader you are still ignorant. and hence why you've got people like Einstein and philosophers of old saying that the more that I learn, the more I realise what I don't know. So moving on, and I'm talking a lot more than what I normally talk when I do a walk and talk, but I am a lot more comfortable sitting in the car in private without having people outside listening to what I'm saying about. So the bottom line is that each of us have a knowledge base, which is our personal property, and it's up to us to protect that knowledge base and to defend it at all costs. And that in itself causes issues, because we know that the best way to learn is to share and to contribute to other people's growth and development. But the other thing that we need to understand, and what a lot of people don't appreciate, is we tend to try and simplify things too much. And the difference between Albanese and Scott Morrison is that Scott Morrison was the Prime Minister, and he knows how difficult and how complex and how complicated things are, and how challenging it is to implement the solutions. It's probably easy to come up with a solution, but to implement the solution that will help and allow different stakeholders to collaborate and cooperate is the difference between a great leader and a new leader who all they've done is stood in opposition and basically criticise what the other people are doing. But it's only when you get to try and solve a complex and complicated problem that you realise that things are extremely difficult. And this is one of the challenges that we all face at the moment with a new party, where we're going into uncertain times with an untested government that hasn't sat as government for at least 10 years, and we've got untried, unproven people who are going to go into ministries and take over responsibilities and accountabilities for things which are way over their heads, which they don't have the detail on, and will take a while for them to align it with their guiding principles, and they'll probably not be able to do anything anyway. It'll take a while to understand the complexities, let alone try to implement and do anything. So there are things in our world that are unexplainable. You know, if you're in England, for example, in pre-Australian times, and I was trying to explain to you that what a black swan looks like, you just wouldn't believe what I'm saying to me, because you can't visualize it. You'd think that I was making it up. And there are many times, like over my life, I've talked to many people about many topics, including religion. And unless you've got a certain basis, unless you have a basic understanding of certain things, then you can't really have deeper discussions with anybody, and it needs to just stay at the surface level, which doesn't help anybody, because the meat, the juice, is below the surface. So you need a certain level of understanding before you can learn more. And one of the things that I talk about often is that the art of learning is attaching the unknown to the known. And the more you know, the more you're capable of knowing. And the more you learn, the more you're capable of learning. And hence what we're talking about here in terms of the black swans is that unless you have the basic understanding of something, then you're not going to appreciate the nuances, the complexities, the difficulties, the challenges that are at hand, and thereby that is in itself one of the issues that many people face. Who would have ever thought, who would have ever believed that the computer, the laser, the internet were ever going to take shape and change our lives? Now, all of these things are unplanned technologies. They're unplanned technologies that came from an unpredictable set of circumstances, but they have changed the world in dramatic ways. And it just goes to show that it just mystifies me how these things just happen. They happen by chance, they happen randomly, but they just seem to happen. But they happen in a way which sooner or later serve us, sooner or later work against us. But it's the magic and the gift of life, and I guess it's all part of God's plan to a certain extent, and something that we need to, I guess, appreciate and respect more than anything else. So I've just arrived in Huskisson, so I'll just keep on going. So what else can we get from this book? Just bear with me, I'll just pull over here. And what we're saying is that once you get caught up in a narrative, sometimes it's just important to step back in life and look at things from a distance, look at things from a height, in order to gain perspective and to understand why something is happening, and understand how things join together, to understand the why. Because what the author here is saying is that once you understand the narrative, once you get caught up in the narrative, and hopefully you'll get caught up in the right narrative and not steered into conspiracy theories and BS narratives. We're assuming here that we get caught up and we invest in the good narratives of life. What we're saying here is that once you get an appreciation for a narrative and you invest in a narrative, what's important to understand is that eventually what will happen is the facts will end up filling in the gaps in the narrative. And as we said before, the art of learning is attaching the unknown to the known. And once you understand the big picture, then sooner or later, just through logic, you don't need to be told. It just happens just to make sense, happens to make common sense, that things just fall into place and the facts will follow the narrative. But as I said before, we need to be careful, we need to be discerning, because the facts or the misrepresentations can also follow false narratives. It's interesting to note that, as we said before, the most educated people, the people who are the smartest, the professors, the so-called professors, can get caught so much up in their narratives, in their narrow way of looking at things, in their self-absorbed, self-centered view of the world, that they can come up one day and talk with authority, suggesting that there is no such thing as a soul, as the human soul, and that the brain is the center of everything. But we need to understand that the facts have woven into their narrative, but their narrative is the wrong narrative, And if you get caught up in the wrong narrative, you can become an authority. There's no doubt about it. You can become the smartest person. You can become a professor of a wrong narrative. A narrative that can be proven wrong in maybe another generation or 2 generations. So science, as the author says here, only captures the known. It doesn't capture the unknown. Which is brilliant, a brilliant way of seeing it. You know, we have people talking about climate change and all of these things, pretending that they know what is going on. But the universe, the earth, science is so complex and so complicated that no one person, no one brain, no one mind can understand everything that is going on and put it into the correct perspective. It's all theory. It's all theory. It's all groupthink, and it's just assumptions that people make, and they use their confirmation biases to prove themselves right, even though they are completely wrong or going to be proven completely wrong in years to come. And to understand that there are a lot of people out there who are generating misinformation, and in some cases are generating a thing called disinformation. Misinformation is when you're spreading information that you don't really know is wrong. Disinformation is when you're saying things that you know is wrong, just like Clive Palmer, and you've got Clive Palmer and Craig Kelly, the late Craig Kelly, who was booted out of politics because he couldn't get voted in by his constituents. You get people like that who are spreading falsehoods, and that's disinformation. When you know that you can't hold the interest rates at 3%, when you know that all the things you talk about in terms of coronavirus and all of those things are incorrect, and yet you talk about it with authority, claiming that there are all these scientists who support it. But as we said, there can be scientists, there can be professors who have no idea because they don't know what they don't know, and they are assuming that what they're saying is correct. So what we're saying also now with black swans is that you can't predict black swans. You know, a person from England prior to coming to Australia couldn't predict that there was a black swan because they didn't see any black swans. They've never seen a black swan. Just like there are lots of things in our lives that we can't predict because they haven't happened before. But there are so many things, there is so much randomness that happens in our life. There are 2 or 3 things that combine together in a random way that create black swans in our lives that blindside us, that come from left field. And what I always say is that we can always sort out the issues that we have in our lives. We can always figure out the things that happen based on what we know, based on experiences. But in a rapidly changing environment where nobody has been to the future, you can't turn to anybody for advice because they haven't been there, they don't know. And in some cases, their experiences may be a disadvantage because they are basing their choices, their decisions, on things that they know, but not on things that they don't know, and things that may occur in the future that may react differently to their choice and their decision. And when we have a tsunami of things happening in our lives, they're the sorts of things that can break us. For example, you have a sick child. You know, you're married, you love your partner, you have a sick child, And by caring for your child, you don't spend enough time with your partner, or you don't give your partner enough attention, and your relationship falters with your partner. And when you're trying to sort your partner out and your sick child out, you don't pay as much attention to your work, and your work suffers, and you lose your job, and you look for another job, but before you find another job, your bank is on your back. You can't pay for your mortgage, and before you know it, you've gone to a situation of a loving family and everything being perfect in your life, to a situation which is an absolute and utter mess, which destroys everything. And these are the black swans that come into our lives. But black swans happen all the time. They are disruptors. They are things that happen in relationships. They are things that happen in businesses. You know, all of a sudden you're the majority shareholder of a particular industry, having a proprietary product, and then all of a sudden a competitor brings in something completely different and reshapes the industry, and before you know it, you're out of business. Similarly, you could have, as we said before, you'd have a great family. Your wife loves you, you have a beautiful wife, you look after yourself, but something happens, something disrupts the relationship and spoils everything. Now, we need to be on guard and at least aware that there are things that happen that come from left field and can lead to total destruction. So it's up to each and every one of us to know and to be aware that there are things that happen that we can't predict. The Beatles, for example, Elvis Presley. There are so many founders of technologies that had no idea that their product was going to become spectacularly successful, and not only change their lives, but change the world and the lives of everybody else in the world. So what we're saying is that we need to be aware and to appreciate the black swans, the things that we have no idea, the things that we don't know that come into our lives, and to be firm with our goals, to be firm with our beliefs, to be strong in all of those areas, but to be extremely flexible in our approach, knowing very well that along the path there are going to be tests, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be disruptors that are going to cause us to think a little bit more about how we go over, under, through, and solve those particular issues. Anyway, I'm down here at St George's Basin, and I'm going to go for a drive to Hyams Beach, but I'm going to go to Errol Bay first. I used to go there with my auntie. We rented a few houses there, or she rented a few houses there. And I remember once when it was a dark night, and I'd gone out with my cousin Anna and a few friends of ours, and we returned home, and my auntie had maybe 5 or 10 kilos of prawns that she'd caught. And we said, "How did you catch those by yourself?" And what happens is, on a dark night, the prawns are set to go for a run. They come out and they're on the surface. And she said, all I did was I got the scoop net, and I could see them on the surface, and and there were millions of them. And all I did is just walked up and down, up and down, up and down with the beach, with the net in the water. And she caught all of these massive, beautiful prawns, which, to me, I just couldn't understand it, because when I used to go prawning with my auntie, each prawn needed to be caught individually off the bottom of the water at the sand, and very rarely would the prawns come to the surface. but apparently once a month on a very, very irregular basis, whenever the conditions are right, the prawns will come to the surface, and they're just so prolific and so easy to catch that it's one of those black swan moments that we're just talking about. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm so pleased and honoured to be here. I thank you for joining me on this little section of the trip where you can vicariously experience what I am experiencing, and hopefully one day we can do it together. Take care, and lots of love to my wife in Greece, and hopefully you can get back safely soon. And I know you're going through challenging times, and look forward to looking after you when you get back, and sharing some good moments. Take care everybody, yassas, and bye for now.